It's a gateway after all. Cannabis always was demonized as a gateway drug. I thought it'd be fun to play on that. And so, yeah, it's a gateway. Helps us prepare and integrate psychedelics and also potentially fill in some gaps that are, potentially happening in the psychedelic field. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Filling gaps around safety, accessibility, equity, and embodiment. And then also, as I said earlier, for prep and integration. So, if you're interested in a bit of foundational stuff, because I'm not going to get into everything about psychedelic cannabis, this is a little video on YouTube from 2 years ago, Breaking Convention, a talk I did. So if you're kind of looking for a little intro about psychedelic cannabis, then do that. And what I'm calling psychedelic cannabis would be, I guess, specifically because I've trained at this place called the Center for Medicinal Mindfulness with Daniel McQueen. Psychedelic cannabis is sort of more of like this gestalt rather than just like smoking weed and it's psychedelic. It's a bit, brings in ceremony, brings in music, brings in intention and skill set and all that fun stuff. So that's what I'm kind of speaking to instead of just, smoking a joint, which, can be psychedelic too. But it's sort of a framework. I like the training because it really invites you to go through your own process of like embodying your traditions and not sort of like taking traditions from elsewhere. So yeah, we'll keep that in mind as we go. Cannabis is not for everyone. Because I talk about cannabis a lot, I hear a lot of like, I don't like cannabis or it's not for me or whatever, or they call it marijuana. And I'm like, I would not like marijuana either. I like cannabis. So not for everyone, but things to keep in mind that are important. It's like if you've had a bad experience, it's like anything else, any other psychedelic. It might be about the setting, the dose, right? The skill set. An important thing about dose would be a really cool thing about cannabis is that you can titrate it, right? Which is very hard to do with other medicines. So having a little toke, waiting to see what happens, maybe having another one. That's why when I do this, I usually don't work with edibles because it's a little bit tougher to kind of work with edibles, the timing and the... See people laughing. Yeah, we've been there. And then, of course, the complexity of the plant, right? So are we talking about THC? Are we talking about CBD, CBG, CBN? This is super interesting. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to this stuff. So I love to work with terpenes, like chewing on, pine needle before smoking some weed that has a bit of pinene in it. And trying this out, this is more my own research of, seeing what happens. And I do notice a difference when I chew on a clove versus when I chew on, an orange peel or when I smell some lavender while I smoke a little joint. So it depends on what's in the strain. But I tend to mix strains as well to kind of get that synergy, bringing the sativa into the body with an indica and vice versa. Yeah, I can get really nerded out about that. I won't go too much into it, but a lot of that, I realize I have a screen right here to look up to. And then also, considering cultural messaging, right? So part of your set is like when you're smoking that, there's so many stories you've got in the back of your head that have told you different things about it. So that's an important thing to keep in mind too, right? And then also the amplification of what's already there. So people are like, oh, like when I smoke weed, I just get lazy, or whatever. It's like, okay, well, what mechanisms are potentially playing that out rather than just it being the weed? What's causing that, right? Is there maybe like a shutdown happening in the body? You're calling it laziness, and then you're sort of perpetuating that versus like, oh, I just feel like not doing anything. Like, what's going on in my body? Why am I shutting down, right? So when we treat cannabis as a psychedelic and we look for trusting what's emerging from the experience, then it's a lot different. There's a lot different meaning making than what's, if it's just like, I'm smoking weed to like, shut things down, then that's going to happen, right? So, wicked. So, gaps in the psychedelic field. There's 2 slides for this. These are just, the ones that kind of popped in my head as I was thinking about doing this talk. So overall safety and harm reduction approaches, of course, preparation, integration, So some of these are pretty obvious. Ontological shock. I've heard about a couple of talks that have happened. I didn't get to go to them, but I've heard that some people have been talking about this. So, going into a place or an experience that is beyond your conception of what's possible, and then it kind of shatters your worldview. I'll talk about why I'm talking about that later. What else? Yeah, spiritual or psychedelic bypassing. Power dynamics, I think there have been some talks about that too, where people are, utilizing their position in a psychedelic space to, whether it's to, inform or make meaning of the person's experience rather than them sort of having that sovereignty, or maybe even taking advantage of them for various abuses. So these things are happening. There's also the corporatization of psychedelics. There are these, sort of guru complexes happening, and then accessibility and equity. That specific point is in that other talk that I was talking about. So if you're interested, go to that. Check it out on YouTube. Specifically, other stuff that I've been seeing is, and this is like in the work that I'm doing, is ignoring protectors, right? It's like maybe not giving time to allow the preparation to actually happen, and instead just sort of blasting the protectors. Instead of maybe respecting that they're there for a good reason. There's like an ego structure that, adapted to abuse or to certain childhood experiences. And so just to blast that away, it often will bring more issues in the long run. So I've seen that a lot of people will not sort of take that into account. They'll just sort of blast through that. And then with regard to integration, not landing things in the body. So it's sort of more of a, I have a big story of my healing. It's like really big. It's powerful. I was in Peru. I was like eaten by a big snake. So instead, it's like, how do we just bring these into the body, let them land, become more embodied as we move through our healing. What else? Yeah, suppression mechanisms. So this is similar to the protectors thing, but these shutdown mechanisms happen, and then no matter how many grams of mushrooms you take or how many drugs you take, that's like a biological thing that often needs to be brought into awareness and worked with the nervous system, right, rather than with a plant. And so that's where cannabis comes in, which I'll explain soon. So I thought about this pretty deeply. Is the goal ego death or embodiment, right? We hear a lot about ego death, sort of just like blasting through what is there, becoming one with the universe, versus like, are we doing that? Is that the goal, or are we actually trying to embody, the spacesuit that we came in here with? And this, like I was saying here, this can be a very slow process that takes skill sets and it takes time, instead of just trying to pretend that it's not there and reaching that big connection, and assuming that that's going to be the work, right? So letting the plants do the healing for us without really collaborating or co-creating with them. Does that make sense so far? Okay, sweet. So cannabis as a psychedelic, I'll give you a couple little examples of, based on some of these gaps, why is it helpful? I won't go through all these, but I call it, and Daniel McQueen calls it, a somatic psychedelic, right? So it really gets at the fascia. It allows trauma and stress to be released from the body. The one thing I often say when I'm working with people before a cannabis session is, you're going to maybe shake and like jolt, and this is really normal. This is like, the body removing things, so just breathe with it, stay with it. You're safe, things are all good. And then I often hear people say like, thank goodness you said that, because if not, I would have thought like there's something wrong. I'm shaking, I'm jolting, what's going on? So that can be really helpful. There's this sort of synesthesia that can happen, right, with the somatic. So you're feeling into your body, but maybe also imagining, imagery, or the music is moving through it. And so that combined yoking or awareness can really like bring you into a creative space in your body, which is really awesome. So it's very much a somatic psychedelic, the most somatic that I've seen, but always down for conversation about that. A really cool safety measure is that there is agency with cannabis. And so I always say to people, you can go where you want to go, and you don't have to go where you're not ready to go. And so allowing people the choice to, I'm seeing a no over there. Okay, we'll chat after. This is, once again, in the context of this particular practice, which may or may not make sense. So another cool thing is, titration, right? Giving people that opportunity to take one hoot, or that's what I call it, one hoot, very scientific language, or 2, right? And I often say that, and then people are like, okay, yeah, cool, and then they'll take like 5, and then they're like, whoa, that was way too much. And I'm like, I told you, but they don't believe me until they go, and then and then it happens. So titration, pendulation, teaching people the skill sets of being able to go into something, go to the edge of it, breathe with it, find some surrender in it, and then maybe come back to like a place of resource, a place of grounding. So these are really great skill sets for other medicines as well, of course. And then there's this idea of co-creation. So we're building rapport with cannabis. We're not just like, okay, I'm going to smoke this, cannabis, take over, do your work. I think that happens a lot. We're like in this like very colonized framework of like, I'm going to take this and it's going to fix me. And so anyway, yeah. The other, I forgot to mention, I was at a talk earlier and I had this thought about, I guess one of the gaps would also be, I wrote it down as like isolated healing, so that could mean either I'm isolating like this substance from the context of where it's from, but it could also mean it's like me and a therapist, so for me, I think community healing is where it's at, the group work, bringing it back to the community, really seeing like humanity in the circle, and with one person or 2 people, sometimes it's just a bit more isolated. People have to make sense of it with their one therapist rather than maybe like with a group that was there with them and like, oh, I felt that with you, like I was there with you. So I've seen that a lot. It's really beautiful. And I think, obviously that's traditionally where a lot of the medicine would be. So the co-creation piece, I think I talked about that a little bit. Also, things like, humility, coming at it with reverence, playing with the terpenes and sort of knowing the plant and playing with things and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And then it's also a psycholytic. So psycholytic meaning basically more like ego loosening and sort of doing like maybe one-on-one conversational, somatic, relational experiences with people can be really great. So healing things like relational wounds and incomplete pieces that are held in the nervous system from like fight, flight, freeze, things like that. And then, this I think I made this up, I'm not sure, but it's a sustainable psychedelic. Great example of this, because there's many layers, I guess, of understanding the sustainability part. But for example, a friend of mine, he joined one of my online cannabis circles, and he wrote me back on an email later, and he was like, dude, he's a new father with his partner, was like, dude, this is so amazing. I can, go to my room for 3 hours, do this deep dive with this awesome group of people, come back, be with my family. So like sustainably for his family, for himself, that is awesome. Like instead of having to take, a day off or 2 days off and like going somewhere and doing it. So for me, I see that as very sustainable. And then also in terms of the nervous system, right? So if we're sort of titrating into things, we're not like blasting off and then having to like find our way back. It's like, okay, I'm doing a little bit of this work, coming back, awesome. I can integrate that, pretty easily. I can go back in. So for me, that's very sustainable as well. And then the fact that it's called weed, right? It grows quite easily. It depends on the form of farming, of course, but I think it takes probably less of a carbon footprint than something like, I don't know, any farmers here? Something. You'll have to let me know if I'm just like not making sense with that one. So like I said, the psychedelic cannabis protocol, a lot of skill sets are being asked for and cultivated to be working with cannabis in this way, right? So things that I think would be helpful to work with other psychedelics. And so this can be, at the end here, I'll show you, I like to call cannabis also like a training psychedelic, right? So you're sort of training for deeper processes, which could also help with things like ontological shock and like, big spiritual openings, things like that. So nervous system regulation, basics in nervous system regulation, surrender and acceptance. So, it's like easy to say surrender, but for me, surrender is a skill set and a practice, right? That takes time and it's embodied. I can be like, I accept, I surrender to this thing, but to really use the out breath, to really like feel into like, what's my relationship with this thing? Like, do I love this thing? Do I hate this thing? Am I pushing it away? Like, okay, how do I use my body and use my breath to move into this thing gently? And then that's really true surrender, right? And acceptance rather than like, yes, I understand that I have this because, what my parents did and all that, right? So very, very mental concept of like acceptance or understanding versus really feeling into it and sort of that experiential aspect of surrender and acceptance. I've talked about titration and pendulation, emotional intelligence. So being able just to name the emotions, really like stay with them in the body, can be really powerful as well. What else? For me, like navigation and discernment can be really powerful, especially for when we're moving into like other medicines. And once again, if we think of cannabis as like a training medicine, then we're learning the skill set of how do I navigate this space? How do I discern, like a thought versus a emotion versus a somatic experience? And how do I just be like, okay, I'm thinking about that. I'm going to bring it back to my body. I'm starting to think again, or I'm noticing these thought patterns, and how do I stay with these, right? So really helpful. It's really helpful to, once again, prepare for other medicines. What else? Use of breath and resource. And then, choosing to stay with discomfort, which for me is really, whether we're training in psychedelic work and sort of like as a process, as a practice of, unfolding, of finding ourselves, our essence, there has to be this ability to sometimes stay with discomfort, right? I think that our lives are often governed by that discomfort, and we do everything we can to not feel that discomfort. And so if we can start to build tolerance for it, then we're less likely to kind of let that run the show, if you will. So I think I've already mentioned a little bit that I do these psychedelic cannabis circles. I do them in person, I do them online. It's the only medicine I would work with virtually because it is pretty safe, and we give a lot of preparation and a lot of chats around like what to do in certain situations. But I've worked with people that have no use of cannabis, who have a daily use, who have a bad experience with cannabis, who have, tried every psychedelic you can imagine, people who have never done psychedelics. I did a talk at the senior center in Kingston where I live, and there were 200 elderly folks. It was great. Like they're down, like they're into it, In Canada, weed is legal, and they're just like, I don't know how to, because it became legal, but it didn't come with a package of like, now this is how you work with it. It's just like, oh, it's legal now, and then so eat this edible or whatever, and 3 hours later, they're tripping balls, calling their grandkids, So they're like, oh, this is great, tell me more about this plant. They're all very curious, they're like, oh, in the 60s, I was around it. It's like, well, it's not the same, it's a little bit stronger now. So all that to say, I love working with cannabis because everyone has a history with it, right? And I love to challenge that history. I love to work with that history and reestablish a relationship with cannabis, with people. And sometimes it's like, maybe just come to the circle and don't have any, don't imbibe cannabis. Just come, feel it out, see how people are reacting to it. And a lot of people too, they're like, I don't like to talk on, weed. So it's like, no, there's no talking. You can share at the end if you want, but you don't have to. So it's an inner experience. It's basically what you'd imagine, a ceremony of psilocybin to be like, right? There's an opening, there's an inward process with a bit of a practice and with music, and then there's a calling back, and then there's a bit of a sharing. And usually, I can do a 3-hour one, that's the shortest I do, and then 4 hours, there's 5 hours, there's a 2-day one. I really like doing cannabis and breath work. That can be very, very deep, very ancestral. And if you were in the room, you'd be like, what are these people on? You would think anything but cannabis. You'd think probably ayahuasca. A lot of people say it can really mimic ayahuasca. And I'll tell a quick little tidbit of how we can this sort of titration, this trusting sort of permission with cannabis. One woman who had never done ayahuasca before, she reported after the circle, she was like, so cannabis brought me to this sort of landscape and was like, this is what ayahuasca is. Do you want to go there? And she was like, whoa, no, I'm not ready for that, And so that was so interesting because I didn't realize, I thought, if you've had an ayahuasca experience, then cannabis could maybe mimic it and bring it back, bring you back to it. This woman proved me wrong. Apparently there are these sort of portals into these other medicines that you can go to. And she was, politely said no, because it seemed like she said, that's way too intense for me. Of course, the music that I was playing at the time, thank you, was evoking sort of more of a, I guess, ayahuasca feel, if you know what I mean. The music just was a big part of the setting. So a lot of people say, wow, that's like the word that I've seen the most. A lot of people that have smoked weed before, they'll say like, I can't believe this is the same plant. And then a lot of times there's this deeper reverence, this deeper appreciation of like, I can't believe that this is the same plant. And there's so much potential here that I did not, it's like I've been smoking weed for 20 years straight every day, and I have never experienced this, right? So this deeper reverence, this deeper appreciation of where they can go with it. So often after one ceremony, people's relationship with cannabis shifts in a big way. And sometimes it's like, I need to smoke less. Like I'm like really kind of abusing this and I'm using it to shut things down. But I'm realizing now I can use it to titrate into these difficult things, right? Yeah, and then someone said this once that kind of sparked a bit of an idea of like other medicine showed me who I really am, but this experience gave me the tangible steps to take. Like, okay, this is very tangible. Now I know my path forward. And then also, yeah, people saying it brought me back to these other experiences. So it had me thinking. I want to just make this, very grassroots research thing happen where I made a couple questionnaires and I sent them to people. And then, so these are the questions. One of them was for preparation. And so it was out of 5, not very sciencey, but very, very grassroots researchy. And this is, so it seemed like the skill set in self-regulation was the most that people noticed, but then all of them seemed to, except for maybe beginning a process. And then for the integration, allowed people to land it in their body, which I heard a lot of, and I work with people specifically for that, helping people to complete the experience or the process, revisit it. So yeah, kind of interesting. And I would love to just, do this more, like find other people that I could ask this question to. And then this is what some of the people wrote. I left space for people to like also write some stuff down. And yeah, it's all here. So let's see here. Yeah, able to go back to the impressions and sensations in more complete way. Awesome. Got closure, this ocean of peace. There's this very like oceanic boundlessness that can happen with cannabis, especially with the practices that we show. What else? Help clarify and deepen my understanding of the experience. Good for building confidence and skills to weather difficult experiences with other substances. I really like that one. So a lot of what I'm saying, and yeah, these are other people saying it better than I was saying it. So back to these gaps. And then I put this little thing together here that might be interesting for people. Some of these are what I've seen. Some of these are maybe guesses of what might work, but definitely an interesting way of thinking about like preparation and integration for various medicines. And so like I said, if there are a lot of gaps around prep and integration, then I think that these this plant, in a way, as if we see it as this part of this larger ecosystem of medicines, it's not like better than or less than. It's more like we have this sort of tool belt and it can complement the other medicines in different ways. So as an example, I've worked with a dude that had like a very big 5-MeO DMT experience, and then he came to one of my circles, and yeah, the whole time he was shaking in his body and like kind of just like, things were moving out, things are moving in, and he was just like, wow, like, yeah, I went back to the experience, and I just like really, it was like landing in my body, and I was shaking, and so he felt like it was able to help him integrate it into his body more, and it was able to sort of hint at a bit more of making sense to him, because at first it was just very much just a big blast off. And I think he had said to me, like, he probably did it too much, like maybe a couple sessions of 5-MeO, with not much time in between. So wasn't really integrating it. And then this allowed him to sort of like realize, okay, yeah, maybe I need to like not go back to that medicine for a bit, and sort of like land it in my body. And I also made this for you guys, just in case you're interested. So a somatic psychedelic, a consensual psychedelic, a training psychedelic, a psycholytic psychedelic, and a sustainable psychedelic. So you can see the notes there, because I think I want a bit of time for questions and stuff. But yeah, it's all there kind of, I'm sure, in some way. So if we think in terms of filling gaps in the psychedelic field, I think that this can really help as like a framework and as a way of looking at our relationship with various medicines. I think that cannabis has a lot to teach, especially because we have so much cultural baggage with it, that maybe that can help to alter the way that we understand our own relationship with plants in our communities. So that's it. I appreciate everyone paying attention and laughing at my jokes. Thank you.